Okay, so we are now recording and transcribing this webinar. And um, if you turn on your camera, then you are approving the recording. Um, we ask that you hold your questions. So our agenda for today is we're going to have a brief overview from the CAL FIRE grants unit. As you know, Forest Health just closed its solicitation, and there's some other updates and information that the team wants to share. And then the bulk of this webinar will be focused on the landscape resilience, the regional wildfire landscape grant program, which is a new program for CAL FIRE that Kristen Merrill will be talking about. There'll be lots of opportunities for you to ask questions. Um, and if you could put your questions in the chat, there'll be times during the presentation when Kristen pauses, and we will go through the questions at that point so we don't lose any of those. And then there'll be an opportunity at the end where we can go through the chat, and then also we might do raise hands if that seems appropriate too. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to our CAL FIRE friends and let them kick us off.
Great, thank you. So I'm Shannon Johnson. I'm the staff chief of Forest Health Wood Products and Bioenergy. I oversee our Forest Health, Tribal Wildfire Resilience, and Business and Workforce Development grants, along with our Forest Health Monitoring Program. Before I start the presentation, I'm going to let Kristen introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Kristen Merrill. I work for Climate and Energy as a supervising environmental scientist. I also wear a task force hat sometimes. I'm just going to also introduce Sean Couch, who is Sean.
Hey everyone, my name is Sean Couch. I'm an analyst under Kristen. I also work for the task force and for Forest Health with approving invoices and grants. Very nice to see everyone.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation. Like they said, we're just going to give a really brief update on some of our grants and then just roll into the regional landscape. So hopefully everybody see the screen? Great. All right. So I'm sure as many of you know, CAL FIRE actually has a significant number of grant programs within it, and most people are probably familiar with wildfire prevention and forest health because there are two largest grant programs. I just want to share this slide and touch base on just these different grant programs and the different things that they do. So wildfire prevention obviously covers activities related to hazardous fuel reduction, wildfire prevention planning and education, generally within like the wild land urban interface area. I'm going to try really hard not to use acronyms today. And then you have our Forest Legacy program, which covers activities related to conservation easements and fee title purchases. And then our Wildfire Resilience Block Grant Program, which covers activities related to forest improvement, reforestation, technical assistance, and planning. This program also includes Wildfire Resilience Stewardship, which awards grants on a much smaller scale to a region. Then there's the Forest Health Program, which covers activities related to forest fuel reduction, prescribed fire, pest management, reforestation, and biomass utilization on a landscape scale, so generally outside of the wildland urban interface. The Business and Workforce Development Program, which covers activities related to workforce training, business development, biomass, wood products, and tree nurseries. And then there's the Tribal Wildfire Resilience Program, which covers activities for cultural burns, workforce development. It's specifically for California Native American tribes and tribal nonprofits. And then there's the California Forest Improvement Program. It's a cost share program that covers activities related to forest improvement, reforestation, and planning for private landowners. It's technically not a grant program, but we like to include it in here. The Urban and Community Forestry Program covers activities related to urban tree planting, planning, workforce development, and education. And then there's the Rural Fire Capacity, which is designed to provide firefighting support. And then the Forest Health Research Program, which covers activities related to research. So the Climate and Energy Program, again, focuses on, actually has forest health, business workforce development, and tribal wildfire resilience that is underneath it. As previously stated, Forest Health, the solicitation closed on Monday, and so we're now reviewing those concept proposals, and we'll be inviting those that have been selected back to submit full applications in June. Business and Workforce Development is currently open, and they will be closing on May 20th. So if you have any questions or would like a consultation with them, please reach out. And then Tribal Wildfire Resilience is planning to open late May, early June of this year. So now I'm going to hand it over to Kristen to talk about the regional landscape grants. You're muted, Kristen.
Muted. Yeah, I'm Kristen, and I'm going to be shepherding this new program for CAL FIRE, working alongside our climate and energy team, who do a lot of the smart things in the background with our shape files and our reporting, and then with the assistance of Sean Couch. You can go to the next slide. In the isn't that cute? I keep saying the horse. In the Safe Drinking Water Wildfire Prevention and Drought Preparedness and Clean Air Bond of 2024, there is a section of the bond relating to CAL FIRE and other departments to implement regional projects, and it defines regional projects as landscape scale projects developed by forest collaboratives. It says the project should be developed by regional entities, and it's got all these definitions in there, and that projects should implement regional strategies developed by state conservancies. And then it goes on in the next portion to include the definitions of what a forest collaborative is and what is a regional entity. But the actual wording does say including but not limited to. So it could be outside of these groups as well. If you read the actual bond language. With the bond comes funding. So the next slide is really interesting as far as the funding goes. Initially, we thought that all the funds were for regional projects were going to come to CAL FIRE, but in the Budget Act of 2025, the regional projects funding for that year was split between CAL FIRE, Sierra Nevada Conservancy, and a one-time to Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. I put regional fire and forest capacity in here. They're not in the same section of the bond, but they do have money under the bond to implement regional fire and forest capacity projects, which could be quite similar to some of the work that is being done by Sierra Nevada Conservancy and Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, my understanding is that they're implementing their funding in addition to or along with their other funding that they have. So they're not creating special guidelines for that funding. But Sierra Nevada Conservancy has and did develop grant guidelines, put them out for public review, which most recently closed. They have funding for this year, and then they have administrative funding projected for the next few years. we don't have, we have a proposed funding allotment for 26-27 in the Jan 10 budget. And it's for $38 million, which will leave us in the balance for out years being 30 million. But I found really quite interesting how much money the DOC has for the Regional Fire and Forest Capacity Program, with 10 million coming this year. Their grant guidelines are, we heard that they're likely coming out mid-month or so for public review and comment. But then right now it's projected or proposed to have $50 million next year, and then 114.5 million in out years. And my understanding is those funds are going to go for capacity building in addition to implementation. Next slide. So our guidelines are out. I hope you all have them in front of you as well, because I'm literally going to go through those guidelines, and then we can address questions at different parts of through as we go through the guidelines. So I'll pause, and if you have a question that must be answered, just raise your hand, and we can pause and answer that question. But I'll try and pause at different times throughout as we walk through these for your questions. But comments are due on April 13th. We have an Airtable form that hopefully will make your comments easy to input. You can also make comments on the entire document and then attach the document. Next slide, please. And Shannon, please jump in, or anyone else, like if I forget to say something particular relating to this. So for this funding year 25-26, and the guidelines that are open now, as I showed you, we have up to $30 million available. We're proposing a grant range of 5 million to 20 million. I know when you see that we only have 30 million, 20 million might freak you out. But it's just a range. So we don't know what we'll eventually get or what we'll, at what level we'll fund. But for the type of block grant like this, wow, it's pouring outside. That I think $5 million or 5 million is probably the least we could do. And then 20 million is probably the most that somebody could handle with an expenditure deadline of 2031. I'm going to go over, we've done some pilots in the past, and so I'll go over those later and show what level of funding those were at. Next slide. All right, so the eligible entities are identified in the bond as public agencies. I'm not going to include special districts like RCDs or JPAs. State agencies and federal agencies are also eligible. Nonprofits that are 501c3 and eligible tribes. Next slide. The eligible activities are similar to, but extend beyond our forest health and wildfire prevention. So think about multi-benefit projects. So we're going beyond forest health. We're including wildfire prevention type activities, but not the education and outreach type that they have now in their grant guidelines. But we are including things like maintenance and planning of up to, so you can add your CEQA, your NEPA in there, planning for future projects, up to about 1% or $1 million. And then we also are including the opportunity for workforce education and training as suggested by CNRA in their climate bond guidance. You're welcome, Seth. Our funding priorities. So these are we'd like to have your I didn't see that question.
We can do questions when you need to. They can just accumulate. We're happy to
Okay.
circle back.
Okay, we'll circle back. Actually, let's stop with the, let's stop there and take these questions since they're on eligible activities. Will you fund boundary fencing for grazing or fuels? I would consider that equipment, but Shannon, have you guys had that in Forest Health?
I think if it's a part of the larger project that someone is submitting, we could include it as an eligible cost. It just needs to be a part of, like, written into the scope of that project.
Any other questions right now on going back? Can you go back to the slide before that? That has the eligible activities. Oh, sorry about that, Mike. I'll change that. Thanks for that. You're right. That's a typo. Any other questions on eligible activities?
This is Timothy Federal. Just a question about that planning. Is that 1% or $1 million, whichever, or sorry, 10% or $1 million, whichever is less?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I
Thank
want to
you.
make sure that I have it right. Yes, applicants or their sub awardees wanting to use more than 10% or 1 million. We recommend, so as you can see in the grant guidelines, item H is planning up to 10% of the total funds requested or $1 million, whichever is less of the total grant funds requested may be budgeted for further regional project planning and organizational capacity building. So I didn't put that in there, but it's capacity building as well. Organizational capacity building includes improvements to an organization. Yeah. And then we recommend that if you want to use more, that you leverage that with other funding like RFFC funding.
Dan's also wondering if equipment is eligible. I heard you say to Lynn's question for hazardous fuels, you would fund boundary fencing for grazing as equipment, and Dan, I guess, is asking if broadly equipment is available, it's fundable.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
And then what I would look for is you can go into the grant guidelines and look for eligible costs. There's a whole section. And it talks about equipment in there. And we'll, yeah.
Stephen has a question that says, it mentions special consideration shall be given to projects that provide technical assistance and or capacity building support to enable high priority projects to secure funding that would not otherwise.
We're going to get to that in the next slide.
Great.
Yeah, for sure. And so on eligible or costs, you can go to eligible costs start on page 21 of the grant guidelines themselves and talk about equipment. And it's very similar. There's so that's standard language in equipment, just like the regular Forest Health grant guidelines, not different than that. And I think fire prevention is the same. Okay, moving on. If we're going to move on, we're going to move from eligible activities to funding priorities. And we'd love your thoughts on these too. So we want multi-benefit projects that have been identified as a regional priority, using a transparent, data-driven analysis with practitioner expertise and community input. So projects must employ a science-based methodology to measure and report outcomes, and eligible projects include, but are not limited, those identified in a regional priority plan, like the Department of Conservation's RFFC program or equivalent. Could be a 5-year plan from the Forest Service. To qualify, the regional plan must include the defined partnership, with clearly identifies roles and responsibilities, a clearly delineated landscape or geographic boundaries, and an implementable strategy with defined actions and timelines. And I think that language comes from RFFC actually. But then we also want to make sure that the applicants can demonstrate sufficient organizational, technical, and administrative capacity to implement the proposed strategy and the project itself, because these grants will require significant capacity. We can talk about it later in our experience with our pilot programs. But there's a lot of coordination involved, a lot of administrative duties that are assumed by the grantee to be done for the sub-grantees if there are. That is item A of our funding priorities. We're really prioritizing projects that have other funding that's coming into the project, whether it be directly or adjacent to work, including those projects that bring in extra climate bond funding. Projects that advance regional capacity. So this is really important to us as at CAL FIRE in this, as we developed our regional pilots and moving into this program. But we say special consideration shall be given to projects that provide technical assistance and our capacity building support to enable projects that to get funding that would not normally otherwise have access through CAL FIRE's other grant programs or other funding opportunities. And we have an example there with the pilot that we're working with in the North Coast Resource Partnership, and we'll talk about that later in the presentation. We want to make sure that the projects have broad involvement in the region from a variety of stakeholders, including tribes. Next slide. And then we'll give special consideration to projects that enlist the California Conservation Corps, Certified Community Conservation Corps, Tribal Corps, and that comes from the resource agencies guidance on bond programs. Next one is the same. Where it comes from is the project that provide meaningful and direct benefits to disadvantaged communities. Actually, I think this is a requirement in the bond. So they'll give extra consideration for that. Projects that advance the state's other strategic goals and priorities. The list is long in the guidance document, but I've identified those that are most applicable to this program and put them into our grant guidelines, including California's Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan, which 2026 plan is drafted. And the projects that have environmental compliance completed or near completed, like completed for a majority of their sub-projects. And just to note that all sub-projects are required to have environmental compliance completed within 1 year of sub-award. So not the award that the CAL FIRE gives to the grantee, but if there's sub-awards underneath. And then we've identified projects that are outside the jurisdiction of the Sierra Nevada Conservancy or Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy as priorities for us, because those other agencies have funding for their jurisdictions. So I'll go over the scoring later and how that works out. But we would be willing to work adjacent to, and that would be a really nice partnership there. Any questions on the priorities? I saw some things going by, but
I think there, Stephen had a question earlier about if a grant writer would be for the collaborative would be a eligible cost or for the project.
Yes, that would be capacity and organizational development.
Great. And then Danny Franco had a question about draft guidelines, identifies funding priorities.
Although that cost is a perfect cost to have under RFFC, to be covered by RFFC. But I need to see it.
Yeah. So Danny is asking say that for the part of the guidelines that it says that projects that are outside the jurisdictions of the Sierra Nevada and Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, but the grant scoring criteria on page 16 just shows a minus 10 point deduction for projects that are inside those jurisdictions. Okay. Can you clarify if you're expecting that some portion of this round of landscape grant funding will be awarded within SNC and or SMMC?
We probably would not, like, because we are giving a -10 if they're inside. Like, we're not prioritizing those projects that are inside those regions because they have their own funding for these, the same funding for this purpose. So that's why in the scoring, we would not prioritize those, and therefore they would get a -10.
Great. And then
Does
Dan
that make
Turner,
sense?
Danny, does that make sense to you?
I mean, you could just exclude them, but you're including them. You're sort of like doing both. You're saying you're not prioritizing it, but you're not excluding them from applying for the regional grants. You're just giving them a 10-point deduction. It's just
Correct.
confusing a little bit.
Okay, we could leave them out entirely. We can think about that later as far as our scoring goes. But yeah, they're not our priority because they can be covered elsewhere. But we are going to be working, at least with SNC, we've talked about our grant guidelines and our timing go kind of hand in hand, and we're following them. And same with RFFC, is that our timing is very similar. So we're going to be working together to coordinate on funding and see where it's always best to like match the best funds to the most applicable project. So that's what we have in mind with somebody's in the lobby with this opportunity.
And then Dan Turner asked how regional boundaries will be identified. Are they fixed boundaries over time or ad hoc by fiscal year?
The regional boundaries would be identified by the regional priority plan.
And then Seth with the Forest Service, he said, speaking for the Los Padres National Forest, we have a project that crosses 5 counties and RPPs in various stages. Do you have any recommendations on how to facilitate that large of a landscape?
No, that's what makes these, I want to read that question. Speaking for Los Padres, we have projects that cross 5 counties and RPP in various stages. Do you have recommendations on how to say that letter? I don't. I mean, that's what makes these projects challenging and require a lot of capacity to implement or to actually do, is that coordination. But the RPPs should be done like the folks that will prioritize will have those regional priority plans completed. And know how those, how the pieces fit together. Like, that's what you'll have to show us in your proposal, that you have an idea of how you're going to do this and how you're coordinated across various jurisdictions and various landscapes and various ownerships.
And that's also why we want to show you the examples that we've already had through our pilots later on in this presentation, so you can get an idea of what they've done and people that you could reach out to ask more questions.
And the last is just a comment that the Coastal Conservancy's office internet is down, but they hope to come back soon. I'm still here though.
Paul Robbins. Yeah, I'm hoping that mine stays up because I've had weird computer stuff. It just wants to restart today all the time. But I'm trying to hold off. Okay, so our application process is the 2-step process that's recommended by the Natural Resources Agency. And we will have, and it's really more than 2 steps, but so make it simple. It's actually 5 steps. So an optional, we have a 0 step, which is an optional but recommended technical assistance consultation. All applicants are encouraged to request a 25-minute technical assistance consultation with our regional grants team to discuss your project eligibility before moving forward with the application process. as always, I've been doing grants for a really long time, and there's a lot of times I'll talk to grantees and it's apparent that they have not read the grant guidelines before they're calling. So read the grant guidelines, know them well, have your questions, set up to make the best use of that time. And then we're going to be using eCivis as our grants portal for the project information entry. So that comes with a user guide itself. And so make sure that you are planning well in advance. Because if you haven't used eCivis in the past, it takes some time to get used to. So don't go in there on the last day and don't do that. So our concept proposal is identified in here of what needs to be in the project and the concept proposal. After we have the concept proposal, CAL FIRE will review the invitations and then ask for full proposal and only eligible concepts. So it has to be a complete concept proposal. And I don't know if Julie's here still on the line, but she's just reviewed concept proposals that have come in for Forest Health. I don't know, Julie, do you have any words of wisdom for folks about concept proposals and what make them ineligible, or what you saw coming in? How much of those concept proposals were actual eligible proposals?
I don't have that data for you. They just came in Monday afternoon, and yesterday was a holiday, so I have not actually dove into reviewing yet. It's more just organizing to get them out. Tips. I think don't wait till the last minute. That's always a good tip. It seems like some folks missed or were crunched at the end. Our solicitation closed at 3 p.m., which was a surprise to some folks. So make sure you know what time they're actually due, not just the date. I think that's been the biggest snafu we've had thus far. No, I think that's it. I think, it's just like with any, anytime you're applying for a grant, like really read the grant guidelines and look what they're asking for, or read the application form. Just try to stay on target with what's being asked.
Okay. Hands up.
Jamie?
Hi, I don't want to derail the conversation, but I did want to ask about the concept proposal approach that's being used in eCivis. And I just kind of had a comment about that. One of the things that I thought was disappointing about the concept proposal approach in eCivis was the inability to invite any other co-project authors in to help with the concept proposal development. Like it had to all be done offline, and then you had to put everything in. I don't know if there's a way to sort of approach that issue just to make it a little bit more easier for project proponents to get all their information into the concept proposal form. Moving forward, if this is going to be a process that that CAL FIRE is going to continue to use, which it seems like it is. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. I think the only way that you could do that is if you shared your login information. You can't, at this current time, you can't assign more than one person. So I know that's not an ideal solution. I'm just trying to think of how you could. But that's great feedback. Thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Danny Franco had another question that says, can you confirm you'll be expecting folks can upload a Word or PDF document as described in the guidelines rather than having to input text directly into the text box fields on eCivis?
I haven't built the application out in eCivis yet, but I can let my colleagues who are more seasoned with eCivis, but yeah, I would like to PDF.
I would say it depends on what's being asked, right?
But for like that scope of work and such,
yeah, typically like scope of work. Yeah, sometimes the questions that are asked are actual like data fields of like required data that we may need to enter into another system, like Prop 4, for example, there's 2 systems we have to input information into. And just having them into text fields to be able to export into an Excel makes all of that duplicative reporting a lot easier for us. So I wouldn't say that everything could be uploaded, but typically like scope of work and like for Forest Health, we have our project workbook, like those are uploaded.
Yeah. So this
Yeah.
stuff that we're asking for and how we're asking for it in the grant guidelines is correct. There will be some fields that you have to fill out in eCivis.
Yeah, that was my specific question, was just in the guidelines, the project description, the SOQ, like those things are, it's indicated that you can upload a PDF, right?
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that's the case. Because yeah, like Jamie said, when you work collaboratively on these things, like it's, you know, that's a really nice option to be able to upload like something, a document that you can work collaboratively on with your many project partners that as part of a landscape grant, right?
Yeah.
So that's a nice touch. Thanks.
Yeah. I mean, as with every online system, eCivis is not perfect by any means and has some limitations, and we're limited by what it can do. And that's one of them for sure. That you can't collaborate on it like that. But you can collaborate until you have to stick the information in.
And then one last question before I think we should move on with the rest of your presentation, Kristen, and it's from Tom Gansberry asking how you define governance.
I think it's defined by RFFC, but it's like, how are you working together? And I'll give you an example of one of our grantees and how they're working together, but what is the role? And we actually go down into the full submission and we talk about like, what's the role of each project partner? Who's going to be doing what? Who's the primary contact? Who's going to be doing accounting? How are you going to track progress and reporting? Who's going to be doing the environmental compliance? And that's like implementation of governance of the implementation. But like, how did you get to your prioritization? What is the collaboration and how are you managing that to ensure that it's transparent, open, and has stakeholder support? Okay, let's go on. So here's this proposed scoring criteria. It goes into more detail in the page. There you go. Thanks, Danny. Page 15, this starts on page 15, the scoring criteria. It's just summarized here, but this really reflects if what we already went through, which was our priorities of the program. So we give the DAC and the SDAC, vulnerable population benefits, we give extra points to 10, 5 for the California Conservation Corps, other Corps. We're reflecting the priorities of the bond in those, and the advancing California strategic goals and priorities. Again, that's a bond priority. Next slide. Okay, so while some grantees may come with their sub-projects identified already, some may not, and we recognize that, and therefore we say that within 6 months of the CAL FIRE award, you're submitting to us information on your exact sub-awards. What are the organization? And you may have multiple, you may have 2, you may have none. But multiple, who's the sub-award organization? What are the sub-award amounts? Project descriptions, including locations, key deliverables, including treatment types and acres, anticipated benefits to disadvantaged communities, severely disadvantaged communities of vulnerable populations, and the start and completion dates for those sub-projects, project maps, and environmental compliance status or plans to achieve environmental compliance. The grantee will submit that list to us. CAL FIRE will review it. We're not then gonna score each sub award. You've done that. You've showed us what your prioritization process was to get to those sub awards. But we're just gonna review them individually and as a whole, just to make sure that they are eligible and they meet our eligibility requirements. So it's kind of like a CAL FIRE blessing. And then within 4 months of CAL FIRE approving the slate of projects, then we're going to be asking for the really more detailed information on the sub-award. So we want a letter of commitment. We'll ask you to give us your treatment areas, your work plan, your provides environmental compliance, shape files, fill out the GHG emissions intake form, the assessment for meaningful and direct benefits, and then ensure that you have all your sub-grant agreements completed. So compiling this information, this is on page 16 and 17 of the grant guidelines. Yes, we are actually, I just saw that, GHG. It's important for CAL FIRE to continue to track our benefits to greenhouse gas benefits. So yes, we will be continuing to track that even though it's not CCI funded. Haley's in the lobby. So those things that are listed here on page 16 and 17, that's the administrative task of the grantee itself, is to get all that information from, your sub-grantees. So you're taking on that administrative burden from CAL FIRE, who would be doing this, and you're assuming that administrative burden as a grantee. Next slide. Okay. So we have had experience in doing this 3 times before, implementing this program. Oh, sorry, you can go ahead and click. I think this was from a different and yeah, no, I don't have another. So we have 3 pilots that we've already initiated. They all are kind of structured a little bit differently. And we are still learning a lot from them. And we wish they were kind of a little bit further along than they already are, so we could tell you more about them, but they've structured them a little bit differently. So North Coast Resource Partnership, I've included a QR code there. There's a lot of information on their website about this pilot. The project itself was a $10 million grant from CAL FIRE Forest Health. So all their activities are forest health projects. They are using approximately $2 million in capacity building support to provide technical capacity to their prospective grantees and their grantees. The actual awards have gone to 8 projects, 3 tribes, 4 RCDs, 1 nonprofit. They, going into this, were kind of set up, but they created a region-wide screening assessment that focused on mapping priority areas for forest health treatments that would mitigate wildfire hazard and promote resilient forests. They used that assessment as a tool to help evaluate proposed projects. They went out with an RFP and said, we know of some projects in the region, but we want to know of all the projects. And they built this database because they want to have that pipeline of projects that we talk about ready and know what's ready when a different opportunity comes to them. So they did an RFP. They used their assessment as a tool to prioritize projects. They had this framework that they used. So the framework that they use for prioritization used the best available science and data, and they combined that with local knowledge and expertise. And they had a couple different boards that they had to get approval from that represented their community. And that's how they came up with their projects. And they have signed all but one sub agreement with their sub-grantees. The Healthy El Dorado Landscape Partnership was different. It's right now, the way it's being managed is managed more like a typical forest health grant from our perspective, because the prioritization was done before we gave the grant, and it was done by the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, because they developed investment ready landscapes, and they had, at the time they approached us, they had like about 4 or 5 investment ready landscapes. They define those as landscapes where where partnerships have developed a portfolio of projects that are designed to deliver multiple measurable benefits across a large landscape or watershed. They came to us with 4 projects, and then we looked at them and ranked them in terms of best fit for the Forest Health Program, which gave $7 million, a grant for $7 million. And we looked at them and said, this project fits best with our program objectives and is complementary with our other program investments. So that went to the Great Basin Institute, and that's they are in implementation. And then the Southern California Wildfire Resilience Partnership, they have 6 grantees in Southern California that are RFFC grantees, and they decided that they were going to distribute the funding evenly between the 6 grantees. We recognize at CAL FIRE that there was a lot of work down there that was wildfire prevention work. Also at the time, there was a lot of funding that we thought was going to go into that region from the Forest Service, that some made it and some didn't, that would have funded more forest health type projects. So this is our first project that has $5 million from forest health, $5 million from wildfire prevention. So that creates some more administrative burden there, but what they did is they distributed the funds evenly between the 6 grantees. The 6 grantees each had a work group, and that's their governance structure. So they have governance of how they're managing from the San Diego RCD down to the 6 grantees. And then each 6 of the 6 grantees has a work group, and that has a governance structure. So there's the question of governance. And each grantee coordinated the work group whose scope was to rank priority projects and review them against the grant guidelines and other relevant metrics for success based on their project type. And they are still working on, they have 5 of the 6 sub-grants executed. And they're still working to gather all of that, those items that I just discussed with you from their sub-grantees. And right now they're working on ensuring like they're trying to work on how they're addressing environmental compliance. So it's a learning process for the San Diego RCD in doing this, because there's a lot of project management that they're kind of setting up and then delivering out. So yeah, each one is different. We're learning a lot from them. There is a big administrative burden. I was just talking to Heather from the San Diego RCD today about it. She's going to actually summarize that for me, so I know a little bit better, and we can talk to grantees about that. But do you guys have any questions there? Also really good, within the RFFC community and within your own communities, it's just good to learn from these people and to have that conversation with them. We hope to develop sort of a learning community between DOC and CAL FIRE on these types of projects that'll, that we can, you know, so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. Yeah, next slide. Shannon's going to cover indirect costs because she's got more experience in this than I.
Sure. So one of the things that the climate bond is allowing for are different indirect costs calculations. I think those that are familiar with CAL FIRE and our normal grant processes, we usually have like a 12% cap, and with an approved exception, we can go up to 20%. So what Prop 4 has allowed for are there's 3 different options for calculating your indirect. You can utilize the federal de minimis rate of 15%, a federal NICRA, so you'd have to include that in your application, or a rate proposed by an applicant, and that's usually something that you would have been written and approved by another like agency. So any of those 3 would be allowable. One thing that we are noting is that CAL FIRE doesn't allow for contractors to add markup fees to their subcontractor costs. So we just want to make sure that people are aware of that. So any costs associated with managing your the subcontractors should be billed as staff time or included in your indirect cost rates. So this is a new thing for us. There's I believe it's Appendix I in the draft grant guidelines. While we would love to hear your feedback on it, just know that this is a part of the bond language, and we can't necessarily make changes to it, but we can pass any concerns that you have along.
Shannon, I see a question from Amanda that says, will there be a 20% cap on the NICRA?
No, there are no caps. It's what your approved NICRA is. All right.
You just have to provide the approval letter as part of your application to CAL FIRE.
Yeah. No, there's not a cap for proposed rates. We would caveat that those projects that have a higher indirect cost rate might not score as well because of the funds going more towards administration versus like projects. So that would just be one thing to take into consideration when proposing an indirect cost rate. Anne, you have your hand raised?
Yes, can you give some examples for markup fees at subcontractors' cost or purchases?
So contractors would need to, they would provide their invoice with the actual costs occurred. We couldn't add additional costs to that aren't included on that invoice. So things that are you'd have to be directly billed.
So like, for example, we've gotten invoices from subawardees for certain grants that have like a 15% administrative fee, right? So that would have to be built into the direct cost or just not charged. Is that
correct?
Right.
Yep.
Cool.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah. That was probably a better example. Thanks, Tim.
No worries.
All right, I'm going to go on to the next slide, which I know is going to be everybody's favorite subject. Reporting. So there are reporting requirements for Prop 4. One of them is everyone's favorite of CalMapper. So we are going to have to be entering information into CalMapper for these regional projects. For those of you that have current grants with CAL FIRE, most of you are probably aware that CalMapper is going through some updates. So there will be, you'll still have to provide spatial data for your treatments, but now there will also be requirements for reporting costs associated with those specific treatment areas. We're still working through all of the details with the Office of the State Fire Marshal. So as soon as we have that information available, we will be passing it along to our current grantees, but then also updating, you know, our grant guidelines to reflect those coming changes. So it'll CalMapper, for those you don't know, you have to submit spatial data files every 4 months. And this would be on the subawards that are doing treatment activities so that we can upload them and include them in our tracker, but also the interagency treatment tracker. Generally, the treatments would be submitted through ArcGIS via geodatabase or like KMZ files. They would be your project boundary, type of projects, the activities, costs associated with them, and usually tied to your workbook that you have. And I can't see the chat, so if there's a question on that.
No questions.
Nope. All right, well then I'm moving on.
We did mention that we are doing will we still be doing GHG calculations on these grants as well. And so the regional grantees will complete the intake form for that and follow instructions in the quantification methodology guide for each sub-award. But right now we don't know what the standard reporting will be for the Climate Bond Resources Agency. This is our draft timeline. Just kind of sketch this out last week. And so see how this sounds to you. We have our comments due on April 13th. And we'll incorporate any suggestions, review those. Solicitation open May 15th with pre-proposals due a month and a half-ish later, month and a couple. So I think that's like 7 weeks there. And then we will, and remember that after the solicitation opens, we'll have those technical what are we calling them? Technical assistance consultations. And then the full will look and find out who's eligible and which pre-proposals score the best, and open the portal on July 30th for full applications, with them being due September 10th, and hopefully having awards due by the end of 2026. Which also kind of mirrors what SNC plans to do and RFFC plans to do, as well as to have awards by the end of the year. You can contact us. Here you can give us a call as well. I didn't put our phone numbers down, but and we can take any questions now that we haven't already addressed. And now I should be able to see the chat better.
Dan Turner is asking if the Department of Conservation and CAL FIRE are doing regional block grants. Is the vision to have similar regional boundaries and guidelines, or should they differ? Can they differ?
They will differ. They'll probably differ. We don't have like specific regions. I mean, the task force has its region, and the Forest Service has their region, which we've matched the task force regions with the Forest Service region. But the regional boundary will be the defined in your regional plan.
Thank you.
And we don't know what's gonna be, we've only talked to DOC. We haven't seen their grant guidelines yet. Yeah, Dan, you have another question?
Yeah, we haven't seen them either. They're in supposedly to be released here before too long. The challenge that I'm running into is the term region. And it's used by a lot of different organizations meaning different things. But you reference the regional priority plans. So we've done one of those. It's by county.
Yeah.
So when we talk about regions, it gets a little bit confusing. Are we talking about regions by county, regions by a cluster of counties, like the 3 examples you gave? Or is it, some other ad hoc region by fiscal year, or are they fixed? So
that's for you to define in your plan. So here, regional plan. So your plan, you say you've done a plan, you're going to define the boundary. You have a clearly delineated landscape or geographic boundary within that plan. We're not talking regional as in North Coast, Sierra Nevada, Central Coast, and Southern California. Like at the task force, we talked about those regions. So there are no fixed. CAL FIRE has not delineated any fixed regional boundary. It'll be the boundary under your governance of your collaborative, if that's who's governing your priority plan, and then that defined in your plan. It's as you defined it and delineated it and have a strategy for implementation behind it.
Well, in your allocation, you identify you have a total of $30 million, a $5 million minimum. Therefore, you're talking maximum of 6 regional grants. So would you envision a county being a recipient of a regional grant, or are you envisioning multiple counties like your San Diego model, et cetera? So it's still a little complex or confusing to me. I apologize.
I don't know. We don't know what at what granularity we'll get. And that's, when we talk about the Great Basin Institute's grant, that's covering a portion of the El Dorado National Forest, right? So that's a watershed. And that's the region that they defined. And they're implementing their grant. Southern California is way larger than that. And that was identified because that came kind of in how we awarded that. We just said we're going to give it to the Southern California Partnership. And then they kind of had to figure out how that was going to be delivered and how they were going to deliver that. They had an opportunity to just say, we're going to do this in 3 areas, or maybe we're going to do it in the greater San Diego region or something like that. But within the partnership, they ended up developing an MOU, which defined their governance structure. And then that's how they decided that they were going to, cover all the Southern California grantees down there and their regions. So within the Southern California region, they went into sub-regional planning. And then North Coast Resource Partnership has their own defined, delineated jurisdiction.
Okay, I understand those. I'm familiar with those regional plans.
Yeah.
I would just
regional and sub-regional, yeah.
Yeah, so it's so the next question is, are these going to become fixed regions, or are they going to be
No.
ad hoc by fiscal year or by budget year?
We're not defining the regions.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then final question, Hope, is of the eligible projects, and the participants in those projects. I saw that state agencies are eligible to apply. Are state agencies, and I'll particularly mention CAL FIRE, eligible to participate in the project if it's CAL FIRE funded project?
It'd be the same as our other grant programs. We'd want to be consistent with, you would be able to potentially utilize CAL FIRE crews or engines, especially now that we're trying to increase beneficial fire, but we couldn't pay for salaries. So
Understood there. That'd be supplanting.
Yeah.
But can they physically be on the same project at the same time as a grantee? I mean,
Well,
that's kind of the rule we have right now, is they can't be on the same project at the same time as a grantee.
having CAL FIRE be the grantee as a part be a grantee in addition to, like, as a sub-awardee.
So for example, if we put together a plan that is a multi-jurisdictional, multi-beneficial plan that, you know, meets all the criteria that we have here, and a portion of that land is SRA, and part of the plan would be to have prescribed fire and have CAL FIRE do the participation as the prescribed burners, would that be allowable
Yes,
as part of
now
the
it
active
is,
project? It is now allowable.
because of the beneficial fire proclamation and us trying to get more fire on the ground.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I don't know who had who's next.
I think it was Jamie.
Jamie.
Awesome. Thank you for all the questions and the answers. I'll try to make mine quick. Thank you so much for the examples. They were enlightening, if I understood them correctly, in that it seems like a lot of what this is geared towards doing is, in fact, actually enhancing sort of regional collaboration and building out a regional network, which I think is fantastic. I just had a question because originally I had been thinking, you know, implementation is a really important feature of all of this wildfire mitigation work, and of course it is. Are you sort of trying to find a good balance, and what might that balance be, if that's true, between capacity building organizationally and network-wise versus actually doing projects on the ground? Should it be like 50-50 of the ask, or is that not really how you're looking at prioritizing these projects for funding?
I think our priority is to have implementation.
Okay.
And capacity building, because if you look at, capacity building is only up to 10% of the total funds, or $1 million or whatever is less.
Okay.
So, I think a really good model is the North Coast Resource Partnership model, in that they are using most of the forest health money for implementation, and then are using RFFC funding to provide technical assistance and capacity building support to their grantees, but also in advance of, you know, their applicants too, or prospective applicants. So they were providing technical assistance all throughout, from previous to applying, through the solicitation period, grant solicitation period, and now with their grantees, they're providing that technical support.
Cool. That helps address one of my other questions. I want to circle back to the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, because you may or may not know, but we, along with our Wildfire Collaborative, are working on an RPP. It should be finished here by the end of the year. And we border Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, and they've got their own sort of RPP going on. I'm just curious, if we had a project that sort of spanned both areas, you know, we're talking about geography that follows no strict boundaries. can we use like the fact that Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy may be funding a portion of that project as match and, you know, and being clear that whatever we're asking for from you is not going to, or from this funding pool is, you know, going to complement, but not, you know, be supplanting of their funds. And would that be a benefit for us to work across those lines like that?
So you would have a project that spans lands, spans jurisdictions, them using their own funding and then applying for this funding for outside their jurisdiction. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sort of like, and this is something that we're running into just as we're trying to figure out how to prioritize projects that span, you know, regionally or geographically span kind of the arbitrary boundaries that were set up between our RPPs. But yes, like being clear about that. I noticed that the minus 10 points, I don't want it to come into this situation where we avoid those areas because we could get dinged.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really good to be strategic and like to look at where other work is being done and ensuring that your work is complementary. You know, I think that's helpful. And when we would review a project, we'd look to see what work is being adjacent to. We're not gonna ding any project on points because they're adjacent to. Like we're gonna look at what SNC is proposing and, like I mentioned, put best dollars to the best fit. So I don't think that would be a negative at all.
Okay. I have a clarifying question about a statement that was made earlier, and it relates to the use of the term landscape scale. And I may have misunderstood, Shannon. I think you had said you would distinguish between landscape scale versus WUI. And implying that like landscape scale was more for like the built environment versus WUI. Okay.
No, sorry.
Okay.
So specifically for forest health, they have they want projects that are landscape scale. And when we say that, there's an 800 acre minimum that we want projects to be specifically for forest health. We're not asking that of the other grant programs or this grant grant. Because generally when we talk about, and I wish I had put the slide in, there's a great image that is for wildfire prevention grants versus forest health grants. And generally wildfire prevention is more in an urban community area versus forest health, which is out in a forested landscape. So that's why we kind of say landscape scale versus WUI for those two.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I swear this is my last question. If we're really trying to get more fire on the ground, I think we can all agree that having insurance for PBAs is you know, a really important thing. And so would a specific like insurance policy written for PBA activities, would that be an allowable cost?
Sorry, I was looking for the illustration and I was not listening.
Danny put it in the chat for us.
Oh,
so I think
Thank you.
to have I think if you have prescribed fire as one of your activities, you could probably have insurance as an eligible cost like under other. But that's something that we would probably need to look into. We still have the claims fund, so you could apply to that still too.
Yeah.
But that's I don't see why not, but I would need to get back to you on.
That'd be great, because we do have access to the claims fund because we do have a burn boss, but we also have partners that would like to see supplemental insurance on top of that claims funds because you just never know. So it would be a very positive development if that was something that could be covered for PBA specific activities, especially as it relates to putting good fire on the ground. And I'll shut up and let other people talk. Thank you so much for entertaining my questions. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of things that we just don't know. You know, like this is a new program, so we're kind of like, I don't know. We're learning from our pilots, and so many questions have come up, and with those too, that each one is like, how are we going to do this?
No, it's super exciting. We've had plenty of block grants, not through CAL FIRE, but through CDFA, et cetera. Love the block grant model. It's just an awesome way to kind of open up flexibility and adaptation at the project scale. So it's awesome. So thank you for doing all the hard work to figure this out. This is great.
Timothy has his hand up next.
Timothy.
Yeah, thanks. What was I going to ask? I think one thing I'm hearing what people are saying around the regions being smaller. I think like in the Central Coast, we've got a lot of like sub-regional RPPs. That may be true elsewhere too, but I could see one possible outcome being potentially partnering, multiple RPPs partnering into like funneling up into a grant application. And I guess I'm just throwing that idea out there.
That's essentially what they've done in Southern California in a way. I mean, they don't necessarily have their sub-regional priority plans done, each one of them, but they went through a prioritization process to get there. It's sub-regionally, each 6 of them. Cool. But again, how that grant came to be was kind of through it wasn't through like guidelines like this where we had an idea of what we were asking for. We just said we have $10 million for Southern California. Figure it out.
Mason?
But your idea of multiple sub-regions coming together and defining a larger region is good. Ventura Regional Fire Safety Council.
Yeah. My real name is Mason. Thanks for putting this on. I did have to miss the first part because I was in another meeting, so apologies if this was addressed at some point during the presentation. I'm curious, this is definitely dovetailing on Dan's initial question and now at Timothy's comments. I think like in an ideal world, it would be great if like we all came together, just like got organized and like collaborated in a really clean way. My question is if there are any plans on the scoring end or the program administration end to ensure an equitable distribution of funds, whether that's evaluating highest risk, or per capita, or with these being like tax funds or maybe geographically. I could see maybe in a like worst case scenario, more funds just being like funneled to certain areas that are a little bit ahead of the game or like have a little bit more of that capacity and can demonstrate higher capacity in those in like the scoring criteria. So I just was hoping you could speak to that.
We don't have a necessary, I mean, we look at everything kind of through an equitable eye, but in this process, I mean, at this point, so think about this too, is that these are not the only funds out there. And I showed at the beginning of this that RFFC has actually more money in their program that's coming over for the next few years, several years. And they will be doing projects that have planning and implementation. So that's another source of funding for you're not all vying for $30 million this year and maybe $30 million next from this program. So we kind of feel like between RFFC and CAL FIRE is that potentially the more ready landscapes and higher capacity grantees may be funded under this program at this point in time. And then RFFC sees like those grantees that may not be quite ready and still need some time and some money for planning and then some implementation to kind of potentially better fit under their grant guidelines. But again, we haven't seen their grant guidelines yet. But I think there's places where everyone will fit. You know,
Okay.
there's pots of money for
As
different
a
levels of capacity. Really.
But
quick
also
follow-
that
oh,
being,
sorry, Shannon, go ahead.
that being said, that's one of the reasons why we have highlighted the pots of money that are going to SNC and Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, recognizing they already have funds going there. So we are looking for projects that are either adjacent or outside of that. But also within CAL FIRE, that is something we do take into consideration generally, is trying not to have all of our grants in Southern awards be in Southern California versus Northern California versus the coast. So I think this is something that we would do our best attempt to distribute as we can on applicants that are on those higher level applications that come in. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So like once the applications come in, then you're kind of mapping
But-
out best you can.
Yeah, and one thing you might have missed is that these grants are going to require a high level of capacity and organizational capacity. Because you're taking on an administrative burden, you're kind of taking on the role of a CAL FIRE forester and a CAL FIRE program manager in managing the sub grants underneath.
Okay. Yeah,
There's
with
a
the
good-
block grant
good
style.
administrative burden there.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. I think in addition to the capacity perspective, like the geographical distribution is always top of mind. So thanks for speaking to that.
Kristen, I just wanted to chime in too. We've had a number of partners ask about whether they could pay for a position through this funding because it has such a big burden administratively. So could
Yeah.
you speak to that as well?
That's an allowable expense. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's a smart thing to do. Is to make sure that you have someone that that can deliver and that can coordinate and manage. It seems a lot.
We have
So think about in
minutes
the
left.
North Coast Resource Partnership, there, it's actually Humboldt County who's the administrator.
Stephen, you've been very patient. What is your question? And Damien, I hope to get to you too, but.
Well, I know we got a couple minutes. I think you touched on it just now, but I wanted to revisit the special consideration toward technical assistance capacity building. I believe you mentioned RFFC is more suitable for grant writing. So I suppose an example based on what you just said is more of like a grant manager, maybe billing admin, that type of stuff related to this project as at large. Is that fair?
Well, it would be, I mean, that would be like a staff position or a contract position. And I just mentioned that for grant writing, I mean, depending on if you have RFFC money, it's kind of like that would be like grant writing would be a good place for RFFC funding. It's kind of like, again, matching best fit, funding to best fit, but you can put a project manager, you can fund a project manager under these grants.
Okay,
And
yeah.
again, we're going to be looking at the budget to make to like what I had put in the chat before is how we will look at and score the budgets.
Okay, thank you. I know we're out of time.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Damien, if you could put your.
I'm good.
You're good.
Okay.
Okay.
I can put it. I can put it in the chat.
In the chat.
No
that
worries.
would be great. That would be
No
great.
worries.
Well, I want to thank everyone. We have just 2 minutes left. And so just to close out, we really appreciate our CAL FIRE partners for spending this time with us. Thank you all for spending the hour and a half talking about this exciting funding opportunity. I'm excited to let you know also that we are scheduling a similar type of discussion webinar with Department of Conservation. A save the date will go out this week, but it will be for May 7th. So keep your eyes peeled for that. It'll be a similar format. They are releasing their guidelines. As Kristen said, we think it's middle of the month, and Natalie might be on this call and can verify that. But it'll be an opportunity to hear about their program, their timeline, and I think it's a great complement to the opportunities we're hearing today. So thank you guys so much. We will save this recording and we're hoping to put it onto the Conservancy's YouTube page. So we'll send a link when it's ready.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.